Imagine two people living in the same city. One person owns several companies, a giant house, and enough money to travel anywhere in the world whenever they want. The other person works long hours, but still struggles to pay rent and buy groceries. Both people live in the same country, but their lives look completely different. This situation has existed in many societies throughout history, and it often leads people to ask a very simple question. Should society do more to reduce extreme inequality? That question sits at the heart of socialism. Socialism is an economic and political idea that focuses on creating a society where wealth and resources are distributed more fairly. Unlike pure capitalism, where private businesses and markets control most economic activity, socialism argues that the community or government should play a larger role in managing important resources. The goal is not necessarily to eliminate wealth completely, but to make sure everyone has access to basic needs such as healthcare, education, housing, and opportunities. In other words, socialism tries to answer a big challenge. How can a society grow economically while still protecting the well-being of all its citizens? To understand why socialism became such an important idea, we need to go back to the 19th century, during the Industrial Revolution. Factories were expanding rapidly across Europe and North America. Cities were growing quickly, and industries were producing goods on a massive scale. While this economic growth created wealth for some, it also created extremely difficult conditions for many workers. Factory employees often worked long hours under dangerous conditions. Labor laws were weak or non-existent. Workers sometimes lived in crowded neighborhoods with poor sanitation and little access to healthcare. Meanwhile, factory owners and industrial investors could become incredibly wealthy. This growing gap between rich and poor made many thinkers, writers, and activists question whether the economic system should change. Some of them believed society needed a system that would protect workers, reduce inequality, and provide basic services for everyone. That idea gradually developed into what we now call socialism. Early socialist thinkers argued that industries such as railroads, mines, and factories were too important to be controlled only by private owners focused on profit. Instead, they believed these key industries should serve the needs of the entire population. Socialists also believed governments should help provide essential services like public education, health care, and social support programs. Now, socialism can take many different forms, and not all socialist ideas look the same. Some versions call for strong government involvement in the economy, while others focus more on worker ownership and cooperation. And just like other political ideas, socialism has supporters and critics. Supporters often argue that socialism promotes fairness, social stability, and equal opportunity. Critics sometimes argue that too much government control can reduce economic efficiency or innovation. But before these debates spread around the world, socialism first had to grow as a political movement. And that growth happened during a time when workers across Europe were beginning to demand a stronger voice in society. As the Industrial Revolution continued during the 1800s, workers began organizing themselves in ways that had rarely happened before. In factories, mines, and railroads, laborers shared similar experiences. They worked long hours, earned low wages, and often had little job security. Slowly, many workers started realizing something important. If they acted together, they might be able to demand better conditions. This realization helped create labor movements and trade unions. Workers formed organizations that negotiated with employers for higher wages, shorter working hours, and safer workplaces. At the same time, intellectual thinkers across Europe were writing about how economic systems could be improved. Some of the earliest socialist thinkers included people like Robert Owen, Henri de Saint-Simon, and Charles Fourier. These early socialists imagined communities where cooperation replaced competition. Instead of businesses fighting for profit, people would work together and share resources more equally. These early ideas were sometimes called utopian socialism because they imagined ideal societies where fairness and cooperation would replace economic inequality. Later thinkers developed more structured versions of socialism. Some of them believed democratic governments could gradually introduce policies that protected workers and improved living standards. Political parties representing workers began forming in many European countries. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, socialist political parties had gained influence in countries such as Germany, France, and Britain. These parties pushed for reforms that today might sound familiar: public education systems, workplace safety laws, pensions for elderly citizens, and protections against extreme poverty. Many of the social protections people take for granted today actually began as demands from socialist movements. But socialism did not develop in only one direction. Some groups believed socialism should be achieved through democratic reform, working within existing political systems. Others believed it required more dramatic revolutions to completely transform society. These different ideas sometimes created divisions within socialist movements. For example, some socialist thinkers believed industries should be owned directly by workers themselves through cooperatives. Others believed governments should manage major industries on behalf of the public. Despite these disagreements, socialist ideas continued spreading throughout the world. Workers, intellectuals, and political activists in many countries began debating how societies could balance economic growth with fairness. The growing influence of socialist movements also influenced governments that were not fully socialist. In many countries, political leaders realized that improving working conditions and social support systems could help stabilize society. Gradually, reforms such as minimum wage laws, public health care systems, unemployment insurance, and retirement pensions began appearing across different countries. These policies were often influenced by socialist ideas, even in countries that remained largely capitalist. And as the 20th century approached, socialism would continue shaping political debates around the world, especially as societies tried to find better ways to balance economic freedom with social responsibility. During the 20th century, socialist ideas began influencing governments across the world in different ways. Some countries experimented with systems that moved very close to socialism, where governments controlled large parts of the economy. In other places, socialist ideas were blended with capitalist systems, creating what we now call mixed economies. One of the most famous examples of socialism influencing policy can be found in Scandinavian countries such as Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. These countries did not eliminate capitalism. Private businesses still exist, and markets still operate. However, governments in these countries provide strong social programs funded through taxes. These programs often include universal health care, free or low-cost education, unemployment benefits, and extensive social safety nets. The goal is to ensure that even if someone loses their job or becomes ill, they still have support from society. Because of these policies, Many people refer to these systems as social democracies rather than pure socialism. In other parts of the world, socialist ideas influenced newly independent countries trying to build stable societies after colonial rule. Governments experimented with policies that placed important industries under public ownership, hoping to direct resources toward national development. Socialist ideas also played roles in various political movements in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. However, the real-world results of these policies varied widely depending on leadership, economic conditions, and political stability. In some places, strong public programs improved education, healthcare, and living standards. In other places, governments struggled with economic inefficiency or political corruption. This diversity shows that socialism is not a single uniform system. Different societies interpret socialist ideas differently depending on their history and priorities. Today, most countries combine elements of capitalism with policies inspired by socialism. Governments regulate industries, provide public services, and create programs designed to protect citizens from extreme hardship. This mixture of market economies and social protections is sometimes described as a balanced approach, where economic growth and social welfare both play important roles. But even with these blended systems, debates about socialism continue around the world. During the modern era, socialism remains one of the most discussed political and economic ideas. Supporters of socialist policies often argue that governments should ensure all citizens have access to essential services like healthcare, education, housing, and economic opportunity. They believe that strong social programs help reduce inequality and create more stable societies. Critics, on the other hand, sometimes argue that too much government involvement in the economy can slow innovation, increase taxes, or create inefficiencies. Because of these debates, most modern countries try to find a balance between market freedom and social protection. For example, many governments allow private companies to operate freely while also providing public services funded through taxes. These services may include public schools, healthcare systems, infrastructure projects, and support for vulnerable populations. In this sense, modern societies often operate somewhere between pure capitalism and pure socialism. Economic systems today are rarely absolute. Instead, they are shaped by political choices, cultural values, and economic conditions. Interestingly, many policies that once seemed radical are now widely accepted in many countries. Public education, workplace safety laws, child labor restrictions, and retirement pensions were once controversial ideas pushed by early social reformers. Today, they are considered normal parts of modern societies. Socialism's biggest influence may not be creating entirely socialist countries, but rather shaping how governments think about fairness, responsibility, and public welfare. The conversation about socialism also reflects a deeper question that societies have been asking for centuries. How can we create economies that generate prosperity while also protecting people from extreme inequality? Different countries answer this question in different ways. And just like democracy, capitalism, and communism, socialism continues evolving as societies experiment with new policies and ideas. Understanding socialism helps us understand how governments attempt to balance economic growth, fairness, and social stability. Because at the end of the day, the debate about socialism is really part of a much larger discussion about how societies can create opportunities for everyone, not just for a few.